Hello, I haven't had a chance to make a video for a while now, so this is a bit late. I try to get at least one in a week. I have been getting in 2 a week recently, which has been, more how I want the channel to operate. So let's see how that goes in the future. Before I say anything else, I want to just mention how great it is that Cleo Smith is home. I haven't talked about her in other videos, but her story has gone all over the world. Cleo was abducted. She was in a tent sleeping with her parents and her baby sister, and she was taken in the middle of the night, the early hours of the morning, and she was missing for 18 days, but she has finally been found, and it's just unbelievable. I've checked every morning, I've put her name into Google and checked, have they found her yet? But I think, like everyone, my hope was really fading that they would find her alive. And when I saw that on my news app, I really couldn't believe it. So, the parents have had to deal with all these trolls and people who think that they're responsible. I'm not sure why people thought that. I thought they came across as really genuine in the interviews they did. But it must have been an absolute nightmare. I mean, it's really beyond words, isn't it, what they will have gone through, and just such a relief that they've got their little girl back again. So it just didn't feel right to not mention it. I think certainly Australia was celebrating yesterday. The manager of the Mary Piglets restaurant, the Tex-Mex restaurant where Gabby and Brian Laundrie were, the day it seems that Gabby was murdered. The manager's story is different to the story given by the eyewitness.
It wasn't necessarily between them. It was more so Gabby abruptly leaving the restaurant crying, and Brian was just evidently really upset, pissed off. I would say Gabby was upset. He was angry, and he was just being very temperamental towards the restaurant staff. I don't know, you think worst case scenario, like, what was something wrong with their food? Were they displeased with the service? It still doesn't, that still doesn't seem like that much anger is worth something like that.
The manager has said that actually this isn't true.
She says everything that's been on the news about what happened here is made up. She says there was no loud voices, no one got angry, no one threw a fit here, but she says that Gabby and Brian did leave the restaurant without paying, and she says that the server followed them outside, that they paid the bill out here on the street, and that Brian was very calm, but then that they came back into the restaurant together, and that Gabby said that she wanted her money back, and the restaurant said that we're not going to give you your money back, and that then Gabby and Brian left.
So it made me think that it seemed as if he was embarrassed, and he was angry about being embarrassed. Walked out the restaurant and she was really upset. She was crying, and he immediately went to the hostess stand and was just he was just going in on the hostess and the waitress, and then eventually the manager. He exited and entered the restaurant on 4 different occasions within 5 minutes. He would walk out, walk back in, walk out, walk back in. At one moment we thought they had walked out for good. Or he had walked out for good, and he actually left for 10 minutes and then came back just to start the fight all over again.
So what does this mean? Does this mean that the eyewitness was lying? Was she imagining things maybe? It's all quite embarrassing, I think, really, for the restaurant, this.
Early in my professional career, I was a waitress and a bartender and a bouncer, 6 years of it. So I know intimately the functioning of a restaurant. And I also know that oftentimes the manager's not there for everything. So and I also love covering trials where many witnesses bring their story to the stand and give a fulsome picture of what happened. And one witness's account isn't always the same, and sometimes they're contiguous. So I'm very curious as to whether that Instagrammer, Nina Seeley, saw something that the manager didn't see, because if the manager only thinks that was a walkout on a check, there may very well have been something quite aggressive happening next to Nina's table, as she seems very certain of what she witnessed. So I'm not prepared to sort of discount the Instagrammer.
It was lunchtime, so presumably there were a few people there. Maybe it was quite busy. And, I imagine the manager didn't see every single thing that happened. I don't get the impression that the eyewitness is lying. She doesn't look to me like she's lying. I can't know for absolute certainty, but that's not the impression I get in the way that she talks. And also, why would she lie? Why would it be in her favour to make up this story? To get lots of people to notice her? I don't think so, because she's made her Instagram a private account. I also think it's unlikely that the manager would completely make something up, because that would be quite a dangerous thing to do when, the FBI are being told about it. Maybe the witness and the manager were right about Gabby going back in. And the witness might not have heard Gabby asking for a refund. She may only have heard about her apologising. Maybe he'd been demanding it when he'd gone in, and it was just getting to be a nightmare, so she said she would do it now in a nicer way. It could be that the manager saw Brian at a time when he was acting calm. We've seen how he can act like he's calm around the police when actually he just hit Gabby. A few moments later, maybe Brian was behaving quite differently.
I got the feeling that they were asked to leave, or that they were being kicked out the restaurant, because it was, like I said, very abrupt. They got up very abruptly and just walked out the restaurant, and she was really upset. She was crying, and he immediately went to the hostess stand and was just he was just going in on the hostess and the waitress, and then eventually the manager.
Why wouldn't she say, well, maybe what the witness saw was true, I only saw this part of it? Because this is being told all over the world. This is like the biggest ad or anti-ad for this business that they'll ever get. The whole world knowing about this one little restaurant. Do they really want everyone to know how angry someone was at the service there and how it wasn't resolved over and over again? I personally think that the witness who saw Brian being really angry, that sounded right. That sounded like what we've seen of him so far, what we understand of the story that Gabby told the police. It also matches what we've been told about him from other people who've known him, that he would be very quick to snap and be in a temper. Throughout this story, there have been a mixture of responses to Brian Laundrie. There's a lot of people who have written under my videos. They recognise this stuff. They can see it all because they've known people like Brian. So they're very good at spotting the signs. There are other people who think Brian is a good guy and they don't see any of the signs that others see. Even if I point them out, they're not going to be able to see them. People who enter these relationships in the first place, there's a reason for that. They have a blindness. They don't pick up on the red flags. And that happens when you've been taught not to listen to those instincts you have. And the way that we're taught that is through either being abused ourselves as children or through being neglected in some way. And that teaches you to learn to put others' needs first and to see the best in people, because that's what children do to survive. They don't want to see, they can't really see people for who they are if they're in a dangerous situation, because as a child, you've got no way of coping on your own. So you have to get on with your parents as best you can in order to get fed and nurtured and to get the things you need as a child. But the problem is these children grow up and they carry on living in those patterns. They still see the best in people, and they still assume that if someone isn't nice to them, it must be their fault. And then there are other people who are undermining those, that recognition, that they're undermining it by saying that he seems like a nice guy, that he's not like that at all. And they're trying to blame Gabby for what happened to her. And that's because they relate to Brian. So they don't want to think of him as being a bad person or having some personality disorder or just having lots of issues. They want to think of him as a good person because they want to think of themselves as good people. And the people who get most angry at me, for example, for calling a murderer a narcissist, or for saying that I suspect he is, and looking at the narcissistic traits, those people that get really triggered by it, I suspect the reason why is because they don't want to look at this in themselves. When I was making Chris Watts videos, you couldn't really have any kind of disagreement in the comment section with people, because there were either people who saw Chris for what he was, or there were people who thought he was wonderful, and they clearly had big issues themselves because they couldn't put their arguments across without being really abusive towards either myself or someone else in the comment section. So that meant I had to block them. So it was just really a one-sided conversation, whereas at least now with Brian Laundrie, we've got some people who don't see Brian for who I think he was, who can also just put themselves across in a perfectly normal, polite way, and they don't have to abuse anyone. So at least, you know, so it makes it a lot more interesting this time around. But at the time that I was discussing Chris Watts, there were some people who got really angry with the idea that he might have narcissistic traits, and he might even have narcissistic personality disorder. And in his case, again, there was so much evidence for this. There was more evidence because we saw so much of him on footage, and so it was really clear. There was signs of duper's delight in his expression. He was very manipulative. He was very much a chameleon. And all of this was really obvious in the footage. There was also how arrogant and entitled he was. There was the contempt that was very clear from him. We know that he has murdered one child in front of the other. And we know that he's confessed that Bella was saying, are you going to do that to me? So in other words, she was tortured. She was put through emotional, huge distress before she was murdered. And that's on top of everything else, on top of what happened to his pregnant wife, and you know, and of course the baby, and what, you know, how the bodies were discarded, how they were put in oil. So we've also seen evidence of Chris Watts, the way he talks. We can see he has absolute lack of empathy. So we had all of the evidence in front of us, but there were still these people who couldn't bear to see him as having narcissistic personality disorder, and it made them really furious, you know. And I found that really revealing. And I remember at that time that one of these people made a video about me that was you know, that was it was defaming me. So he made up all these lies. He didn't know anything about me, and he made up stuff and put it in a video. And you know, and that got taken down because I complained to YouTube about it and filled in a defamation form. When that video first came out, someone got in touch with me to tell me, and she sent me a text message saying, you know, that basically she was really angry that someone was completely ruining everything I'd done with this video they'd put out. So I was horrified, and I thought, oh my God, what is this person saying? I was really stressed out because I thought you know, I just took what she said at face value and thought somehow someone is ruining everything I've done. How is that? What are they doing? And I didn't watch the video. I asked her because I thought maybe I'm going to get really upset or really angry or both. So I said to her, could she just, you know, would she mind just watching it and telling me the main points so that I could go to YouTube about it? So she sent me all of the points he'd made. And when I read them, I just felt so much better because he came across, you know, he revealed himself. He came across as somebody who was clearly really triggered, who was really arrogant and nasty and abusive and all of this. And so after finding out what he'd said, I actually felt fine, and I filled in the defamation form because he was saying things that weren't true, and that was taken down. But you know, it's interesting how with smear campaigns, you worry for the person, you know, for how are they doing if everyone's saying nasty things. But in reality, if you can find out what people are saying, you'd be surprised at how much better you feel when you hear what ridiculous things people are actually saying, you know. And in this case, I think he was talking about me having ballet lessons or something. I don't know, but but there was so much bitterness in this video, you know, and so much resentment. And I'd never met this person. I didn't even know who they were. I'd never seen any of their videos. So, and yet it felt so personal to this guy who had to make this nasty video. And so I thought that this was a really good example, you know, an interesting parallel. Because, you know, to what happens when you're in a relationship with a covert narcissist and people don't believe you, just to see how angry it could make someone who wasn't even the person I was talking about. He didn't know Chris Watts, and yet it made him furious. There was somebody else who made a video that was in response to a video that I'd made that he decided was about him. And this was somebody else whose videos I'd never seen. I'd never seen any of his videos. I didn't know anything about this guy, but he, you know, had this personal vendetta about me and put out this video about why Chris Watts wasn't a narcissist. And I heard about this through my viewers, you know. Somebody had got in touch with me and said that people were saying Chris Watts wasn't a narcissist. And I said, could you get the main arguments out there that you're seeing across YouTube and wherever you're seeing it? Because I knew that there were lots of people saying that he wasn't. And I'd put together from those main arguments, I'd put together a video about why I thought actually none of those made much sense, you know. None of them were good arguments in my opinion. And that was because I think it's such a shame when we have this opportunity, when we have a platform to be able to actually help people, to try to undo that because of people's own egos, because they don't want to face this stuff in themselves. They're quite happy to promote somebody else, to promote a murderer, so that they don't have to see themselves for who they are. And it doesn't matter who gets damaged in the process. It doesn't matter about all the people who've been in abusive relationships, or all the people who might end up being like Shanann, who might end up in domestic violence situations and who might get murdered. You know, it's not about protecting any of those by actually looking at the truth. It's about, wow, that was loud. It's about endlessly defending themselves through talking about somebody else in a positive way. But again, you know, the fact that I only heard through my viewers what this guy was saying. They were saying, you know, that he was really angry, that he came across as really arrogant and full of contempt, and he thought that I was personally getting at him, and he had to smear me. And again, this is someone I really knew absolutely nothing about and had never thought about before, but it felt really personal to him. So, you know, and you've got to wonder why. Why is that? Why would someone be so bothered that somebody else is saying that a murderer who killed a pregnant woman and 2 small children had narcissistic traits? I had a comment under my video that said that that he was delicately smearing me, which I thought was very well put, you know, and you know, and maybe he was. I mean, I haven't seen the video, but it's interesting how all this time later, I mean, it must be over a year later since I was talking about Chris Watts, this guy is now really stressed out again about the idea of Brian Laundrie being a narcissist. I love looking at people's comments, you know, I really do enjoy it, and I wish I had the time to reply to more people and really get into some of these conversations, because there's so many people with really interesting things to say. So this one was left by someone called JJ. I think in some cases, JJ says, Narcissists may also pathologize their victims with labels such as too sensitive, over anxious, vivid imagination, etc., which sadly the victim may subsequently question his or her intuition over time. And Gabby did talk about how she's OCD, but apparently there's no diagnosis of that. She just talks about herself as being that, and people have wondered if that's because Brian has said that of her. And if you look at the footage, she comes across as really, really upset and really stressed, and Brian comes across as really calm, having a laugh with the police, and and so on. So if you were to assume that Brian was a really healthy person, then Gabby would come across as, as if she really has some big issues, because why is she in that state? And yet, what we know is that Brian was seen hitting her, and he'd locked her out of the van not long before. So that shows that actually Brian wasn't a normal, I've only got one hand because I'm holding the mic, but he obviously wasn't a normal guy. And so actually Gabby's response seems a lot more normal. And so why is Brian so calm? That's not normal. And yet some of these trolls, are talking about how are talking about him in a really positive light, like he's normal and she's the crazy one. And so the gaslighting begins. This is what people experience when they've been in these relationships. The people around them, often including their own family, will say, don't leave this person, try harder. They're surrounded by people who don't trust, or who don't appear to trust, what their own experiences and their own intuition tells them. When you start to see the person that you're with, when you start to see their true colours, it will make other people angry. They don't have to be good, loyal friends, even if they appear to be, of that person. But if they're similar themselves, then they don't want to face that. And they need this person to be the good guy and for you to be the bad person, because that way they don't have to face who they are. So I think the way these trolls have responded to me is a really good parallel to, what goes on for people who are in abusive relationships, how others can get really angry as if they are the perpetrator in the relationship, as if they are wronging the person that they're with when they say anything negative about their behaviour, or when they suspect that they have issues. These people need them to believe it's their fault. So they reinforce the abuse that person has already experienced. And it's really in their interest to convince them it's their fault and this person is a good person and there's nothing wrong with them, because that way they can continue to hide from themselves and see themselves as good people. And there are also people who need to believe that the abuser is a good person. Maybe they're their flying monkey, so they do their dirty work, or they enable their behaviour in some way or another. If they see that person for who they really are, then what does that make them? So that can't happen. It just adds to the trauma that somebody in a relationship like this has experienced. And especially because in most cases, these people will have experienced this as children too. So, it's just being reinforced again that how they feel and what they've experienced, it doesn't matter. It's not what's important. There's something wrong with them. There still is an interesting point that's raised, and a point that, if we look at it in a different context, could be a very good, well-made point. And it's kind of a shame that it wasn't made in a different context, because it's a point that might otherwise be taken seriously, or maybe I should say that I would take it seriously if it was said without the person actually being a troll themselves. The parents, how much more agonizing was their situation made with all these different people on social media blaming them and saying that they'd murdered their daughter. I think it's a good reminder to not assume the worst of people, especially not publicly, if there's no evidence they've done anything wrong. In this case, it seems very likely that Brian murdered his girlfriend, Gabby. I mean, they're not looking for anyone else. The police are pretty sure he did it. And, you know, and from what we've seen of the couple, we see witnesses talking about what they have witnessed firsthand. You know, and they're prepared to come and talk about that. And, you know, we hear the person calling the police on Brian because he's seen hitting Gabby. So, so if the intention is to talk about these kinds of interactions and these kinds of relationships in order to warn the public, in order to help those who have been in abusive relationships, and in order to help those who haven't yet avoid them, then given that we have all of this evidence, I think that any damage that might be done to the person who's being talked about, you know, say Brian had still been alive, the embarrassment caused to him by videos talking about him in this way, I believe would be justified because of the good it can do others. We can see that he lacks empathy. We can see him laughing while Gabby is in real, you know, in tears and looking absolutely desperate. We can see how he feels entitled because of what he's just done and he's admitted himself doing to the police, locking her out of her van. We can see his arrogance in his Instagram posts, the way he talks in a you know, full of contempt about his girlfriend being the sidekick. We can see in his art his love of pain, of blood and gore, and you know, so in other words, people's pain. When Gabby apologised to him for being in a bad mood, even though she wasn't rude to him, he wasn't okay with that. She didn't apologise in the right tone of voice, and so he punished her by making her think she'd be left in this town on the other side of America to where she knew. He put her bag on the ladder on the back of the van. It looks like he took her phone, so you can't get much more controlling than that. According to her friend and his workmate, he was really jealous and quick to anger. So these are all narcissistic traits. And of course, the way he comes across as a chameleon. And we can see that. And his workmate attests to it as well. The superficial charm. These are traits of antisocial personality disorder. He was so aggressive, you know, because he was violent. The total lack of remorse that we see by him using Gabby's credit card and grinning on a branch on this camping trip after having murdered her. And the same goes for impulsiveness, you know, the fact that you know, if assuming that he did murder her, that he just did that, you know, there was no, he wasn't able to just stop and think. And, you know, and I think we saw something similar with what the witness said about the restaurant, that he kept going in, that he was so angry. That's impulsiveness as well. So again, these are all traits of antisocial personality disorder. And I don't know that he would have fulfilled all of the criteria for that. But we can see evidence for traits of both disorders. And of course, Chris Watts also had traits of antisocial personality disorder.
I just want them back.
And I made a video about that, you know, about looking at psychopaths and comparing the two. So if you have someone in your life who's treated you badly, who others see as a good person, and they won't believe you, you can do as I'm doing here and list all of the things they've done towards you and others that don't feel right. And that list and the length of it will speak for itself. So expect that people will back up an abuser because it's all part of the pattern. These enablers are the people abusers are surrounded by. I'm going to leave it here. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. gave me a shock. What are you up to today? You're going to go for a swim? It's beautiful out there. Did that lady give you a shock? Did I give you a shock? That beautiful tail you've got. It's lovely, isn't it? You've got a shell on you. You have. You've got. Someone's making a home on you. I think you need to drop that shell back in the sea where he belongs, don't you? Like a little pet parrot. Okay, I'll see you next time. Bye.